Outer Wilds is a game that means many things to many people, but one sentiment I share with every other video or thread discussing this game is that it's worth experiencing with as little prior knowledge as possible. It's an experience you can only have once, so if you've somehow stumbled on this video and haven't played this game, I strongly encourage you to do so and discover its secrets on your own terms rather than hearing them secondhand from my subjective attempt at conveying their meaning. With that out of the way, I'd like to return to that first sentence. My interpretation of the game may not reflect how you felt about it, how other video essays saw it, or even the developer's intentions. I finished this game over 2 years ago, and I've been thinking about it since. I've tried to articulate these thoughts several times over, but each time they're dwarfed by thoughts that I can't do justice to this defining aspect of my life. I'm trapped in an orbit by the magnitude of what Outer Wilds means to me, struggling against the gravity of its importance, only to end up right back round where I started. A blank page. With that in mind, I'm going to take this step by step. The video game is one of the most immersive mediums. It places you not just as an observer to a story, but as the driving force at the centre of it, surrounded by a tangible visualization of the world you, as the player, are in. I reiterate this basic principle to stress how powerful the sheer involvement of the video game should be. My first contact with the computer game came with VeggieTales: The Mystery of Veggie Island, a classic from the franchise of preaching bouncy veggie Boy Scouts. Armed with nothing but the disc and a sense of wonder, my brother and I descended into this new land with no expectations of what was to come. We were set loose on an island with no predefined goal to guide us or tutorial to ingrain the correct things to interact with, and so our curiosity and human craving for understanding took over. Naturally, this isn't to praise the groundbreaking game design of VeggieTales: The Mystery of Veggie Island. This was a point-and-click title with light puzzle elements and a lack of gamification because its target audience was people like 4-year-old me, who if overwhelmed or frustrated were likely to retreat back to looking through their collection of Doctor Who cards for the 3rd time that day. But because of our obliviousness to the language of video games, something magical happened. What could have been a simple hour-long jaunt for one familiar with games was, for us, hours upon hours of, to my memory, endless possibilities in this new existence. No one had told me to seek out this hidden cave with a pirate ship, so to my mind, it was a discovery I had made all on my own. At the time, I didn't understand the game's systems and its limits, and so it ceased to be a piece of software and became, to me, a new reality with a new set of rules to be understood. Video games fell in and out of my life, but they hadn't been another life for a long time now. They were part of the everyday, something I understood as intimately as flushing the toilet and washing my hands. They had different themes, settings, and stories, some of them powerful enough to filter through to my life in terms of my personality and interests. But none became a different life, an escape from the norm. Video games are a medium of endless possibility, but aren't immune to the life cycle of human expression. Originality breeds success. Success breeds imitation, breeds genre, and its conventions. To appeal to a player, the accepted logic is that a game must convey what it is. It must communicate its foundations, a shooter, an RPG, or an adventure maybe, and its systems. Perhaps it has character creation, a skill tree, or a quest log thrown in there. Direct a player, the common wisdom is that there must be points of familiarity that the subconscious latches onto and understands how to use, no matter the set dressing. The open world genre is well known to be a prime example of this. The USP is freedom, but the developer needs to trust that the player will be directed to their handcrafted content nonetheless. Your Witcher senses highlight the next clue in bright red, the next handhold in Horizon is painted a vivid yellow. This conditions expectations. You see where you need to go, you're told what you need to do, all before conscious thought is required. This predictable structure gradually makes the act of playing less and less engaged and more automated. When the systems of a game are already familiar to you from the current game landscape, the verb to play becomes increasingly supplanted by to do. Outer Wilds is a game where you play. There are plenty of sandbox games or immersive sims that offer player-made fun. This idea of players finding their own fun in a game by pushing and pulling at its systems isn't exactly a new one. Where Outer Wilds excels is in creating a game with utter freedom of where to go, but with such a dense concentration of knowledge-based rewards in the writings of an ancient species, the Nomai. Narrative designer Kelsey Beecham explained the thinking behind this in her 2020 GDC talk. When text does deliver a hook, it can only do so when the player chooses to interact with it. I can't push that information onto the player. This means that whatever ambitious space maneuver the player attempts, they're usually doubly rewarded. First with the joy of pushing the game's boundaries, and then with a compelling story hook. Want to land your ship on that tiny station rapidly orbiting the sun? Then you'll discover the life cycle of the sun and how the Nomai try to accelerate it to power their desperate search. Essentially, the design of these knowledge-based rewards comes hand in hand with the game's freeform approach to traversal. There's a reason Outer Wilds is an outlier in giving its players such freedom. Most games, open world or not, rely on guiding players down a so-called golden path, so that, minor excursions aside, they reach the location of each main story beat that moves them through the game. This golden path can be hinted at in more or less subtle ways, ranging from the positioning of landmarks to be used as visual points of reference to the more overt use of colours I touched on earlier. Developers Mobius Digital tackled this path by doing away with the need for it altogether. Rather than highlight areas in a more artificial manner, their artists elected to keep areas without content absent of any graphical detail, thus allowing the player to quickly identify any areas worthy of exploration. And in a 3D space where all these locations are constantly moving and rotating in relation to the player, the chance of them missing one altogether is minimal. The level design within these areas of content is just as smartly optimized, allowing for players to return to locations they already know within seconds, whilst retaining the undertaking that it is to reach them for the first time. All without fast travel or any other additional interface that could break immersion. The quintessential examples of this are the two ancient Nomai cities that can be discovered. When reaching Embertwin, the crashed escape pod is immediately signalled as a potential curiosity through its bright locator beacon, and marks the beginning of a thread that I couldn't help but follow, the fate of the Nomai aboard. It winds its way through the escape pod, out the rear hatch, and into the ensuing subsurface tunnels of the planet, ensuring I engaged with the systems in use here, platforming between rocks and above rising sand, adding a risk of failure and time sensitivity respectively, to all culminate in the reveal of the comparatively vast sunless city. Once inside, I could now take another exit that brought me out among a fairly innocuous rocky slope, thus revealing a streamlined entrance for any future explorations of the city. A technique that's repeated under different circumstances in Brittle Hollow's Hanging City. And this reliance on player learning is a quality that's baked into the next foundational pillar of the game's design, the game's chaotic implementation of Newtonian physics. Each planet in Outer Wilds is not coded as its own isolated level. No, the inspiration for game director Alex Beecham's early prototype, his university project, was having each astral body simulated simultaneously, with velocity in relation to each other. For a player starting the game, this most likely means 1. Waking up on their home planet, 2. Taking off in a dubiously handmade spaceship, 3. Hurtling into another planet because they didn't think of slowing down. Space is dangerous, you might die, and therein lies the final tenet of Outer Wilds' design that accounts for this, a time loop. Not only does this facilitate the recurring high stakes that is the destruction of the solar system, but it encourages player experimentation when a reset is always at hand, which in turn supports a trial and error gameplay loop where learning about the solar system is a first-hand experience. You'd expect that this would require a certain level of pre-existing patience from the player, being sent back to 0 after 22 minutes. But I struggle to see frustration often being an issue in a game that is built around introspection. It has a beautiful soundtrack, cozy in its minimalism. It tells you of characters who are kind, understanding. When you need a rest, it gives you an oasis, a campfire and a tin of marshmallows. The solar system is compact, returning to a spot is never a chore. But most of all, the time loop embraces failure. Each mistake lets you learn and grow, and through this cycle, a sense of enlightenment is born from the sheer knowledge you can achieve and retain. If the player was lacking patience before entering, the wilds instill that in them. As Alex Beecham put it on Adam Conover's Humans Who Make Games podcast,
you can't change nature, but you can understand it.
Yes.
And so it was this idea of, okay, we're going to build these systems and we're going to hide these curiosities at the core of these systems.
This comes true in the most spectacular of ways.
If he fell through the black hole by accident,
departure time.
Now my arriving at the warp receiver on Brittle Hollow, slightly before departing from the Whitehall station. The implications are absurd.
This combination of secrets inside systems leads to many more adventures that combine the thrill of a more linear game with the accomplishment that comes with player-led discovery. Like the time I fell into one of the larger geysers on Timber Hearth and spotted an alternate exit that led even deeper, whereupon geothermal currents picked me up and buffeted me through underground passages and caverns. It only felt fitting for this rollercoaster-like experience to conclude by finding lost depictions of our species' origins in what were essentially the bowels of our home planet. The true beauty of the game began to seep into me as these early forays into the unknown are mounted. The nomai that were once fossils became real to me. The names that seemed alien became familiar. Idea and Pi and their ethical disputes, Poke and Clary and their bond as siblings, this entire intelligent community with a proclivity for cheap puns. I became invested in their struggles for both their sake and mine, as their research feeds directly back into the current predicament of the player. Their millennia-old musings on how to evade anglerfish or navigate a network of caves echoed my own wanderings on how to progress through these areas in-game. And that becomes the driving force, curiosity-driven exploration, or any situation in which someone chooses to explore her environment, real or virtual, with the primary objective of expanding her knowledge or understanding of it, as Alex Beecham's thesis paper phrased it. How do I get beneath the current on Giant Steep? What's up with the interloper? What is the Ash Twin Project? The more you explore, the more you understand, and the more you understand, the more questions you have, and Mobius makes sure you will always be rewarded for this exploration. Every celestial object, however inhospitable, has not only been crafted with nooks and crannies to explore, but it all ties into the overall mystery. What could an entirely volcanic moon like Hollow's Lantern be used for? testing the durability of different ore under supernova-like temperatures. Something will always relate to something else, and all of it is relevant. This depth of detail to the world building is worked into the very core of the game. Every game mechanic that typically requires a suspension of disbelief in other games is tied directly to in-universe events here. Respawning? No, you travelled back in time. Your progress is saved in your ship's log. See, that's using a repurposed block of one of the same Nomai statues that's sending information from previous loops back to you. The recall feature on your scout launcher. You guessed it, adopted Nomai tech, this time using their aforementioned warp cores. Even in the DLC Stranger, an area where no Harthian traveller has set foot before, you can still refuel your jetpack, but it's using the canisters that the Strangers used all those years ago to torch the very history you're trying to uncover. Even budgetary limitations are no threat to believability. Mobius may not have had the resources to program a daily routine for all the Harthians going about their life in the village, but when all we see is the same 20-minute loop of their lives, this is rendered unnecessary. But for me, the inescapable draw of this solar system is how every moment of discovery and exploration is inextricably tied to something bigger. Outer Wilds doesn't just condition the player to think about itself mechanically. In the literal and metaphorical space between the content of the game, I was given the space I needed to both piece together and reflect on the game's story. The universe of Outer Wilds is a sparsely populated one. There are 21 Harthians, other than our player character, living under the light of the dying sun. The remaining population of the intergalactic travelling Nomai is retreating to a single star system deemed the safest from the encroaching spread of supernovae. There is one other, trapped in darkness. But even this dwindling population chooses to go on in the face of the existential horror that is the imminent decay of the universe. They elect to continue together because the relationship with other life is what gives life meaning and value. Some of them are stranded and alone, but they can be reached. And this act of seeking them out and listening to what they are thinking and feeling when others couldn't or wouldn't is the most powerful tool we have in the game. Our suit, ship, and torch help pave the path we take, but our sentience is what moves us along this path. The presence of our empathy is what gives any meaning to the worlds we inhabit. And it is this activity, not passivity, that leads us through the game. We're granted awareness of the time loop that holds us in place by a Nomai memory storage device. It is their legacy of inquisitiveness that we inherit, and their tools we pick up. The character Gabbro, whilst at a level of Zen I will never reach, shows us what will happen if we don't use the opportunities those before us have worked for. Without our actions, they remain eternally conscious of the end of the world on repeat every 22 minutes. It's by utilising all that the Nomai have left behind, combining their technology on 3 separate planets, that allows the player to escape on the final loop. The end of Outer Wilds is also the end of the universe. The main puzzle to solve at the heart of this game has always been the heart of the solar system, the one which all other puzzles orbit. How do I save the sun? With so much to learn, the answer must be here somewhere. Perhaps it was this surety of the game's natural conclusion that left me blind to the way out all along. After visiting the centre of Giant's Deep, the Ash Twin Project, and the crashed vessel at the heart of Dark Bramble, I had all the answers I needed, but still I set my sights on horizons new. I hadn't yet made it to the Sun Station. If anywhere held the key to stopping the sun's self-implosion, it must be that platform with the closest view. But for all its gravitas, the Sun Station only confirmed the truth that somewhere I already knew. All things must die, such is the demand of nature, and neither the sun or I could be an exception to this rule, eventually. and the player must commit to this realization to escape. They must remove the advanced warp core that sustains the time loop from the Ash Twin project. They must take it to the vessel in Dark Bramble, and they must input the coordinates for the one place still unexplored. The coordinates for the Eye of the Universe. The DLC for Outer Wilds, Echoes of the Eye, is about building that bridge, or three, to one of those left behind. It begins with the discovery of remnants of a civilization previously unbeknownst to us on a cloaked station above the orbital plane of our solar system. This species was the first that we know of to have encountered the signal of the Eye of the Universe, plundering the resources of their home moon to build this craft capable of visiting it. But as we learn from a collection of slide reels stashed across their manufactured ring world, the view from up close revealed to them only one outcome. Interacting with the Eye of the Universe would leave grass growing atop their forsaken bones. Amongst all the visual evidence they left behind though, the piece of art that resonated most with me can be found in a scorched hut, eviscerated and abandoned on the outskirts of a settlement. It's the same illustration of the skull from the ominous vision, for the most part. The soon-to-be ostracized prisoner had been witness to the same vision as the rest of their kind, but where their kin saw death, the prisoner saw life. First they drew the skeleton of their species, the resilient bones persisting as a headstone for what came before, but also as a foundation for what may yet come. They drew the grass, the humble beginnings that could grow exponentially. And then they continued. Where others turned away, the prisoner kept an open mind. They drew a flower that bloomed into anything, everything, galaxies. It's unclear to us whether the prisoners saw this with their eyes or their instinct, but the message is clear. The Eye is inherently daunting for its inescapable connection to death. Yet its purpose isn't death, it's rebirth. The death it offers is the chance for others to discover meaning anew. I, for one, am pretty scared of death. As it turns out, so are these strangers. Rather than face this inevitability, they could do nothing more than turn their back on this reality, choosing instead to construct a virtual replica of the moon they once lived on. But even when we enter their simulation, we see the grief that clings to them aeons later, the regrets that grasp them as tightly as they grasp this last semblance of life. They block off the signal from the Eye, preventing others from making a decision different to their own. And the question is planted, is it worth it? The prisoner, though physically shackled, frees themselves from this mental anguish by opening their mind to the fruits of this seed, the potential of what's to come. We discover that their imprisonment is due to them leaving the confines of the virtual world and releasing the Eye's signal once more, where it finds the Nomai clan. I don't want to lose the people I love, but I believe this story when it shows that a world without change and freedom of choice is a world love can't reach. Even with their fervent belief in the Eye after receiving its signal, the Nomai have their doubts. Solanum, the one Nomai we can meet in person, questions the intent of the Eye before deciding that perhaps it has no intent at all. This lack of surety only goes to make these characters more compelling. After the fatal crash when they arrived in our solar system, the Nomai Kusa writes of one they lost, "I don't know how to be me without you." They still feel the pain that mortality brings, even with the promise of the Eye to fall back on. As highly as I and many others regard it, Outer Wilds doesn't see itself as a spiritual experience. It calls to me because of its honesty to the human experience, It's set in another universe, and yet in its characters remains entirely grounded. I often come back to Solanum's questions. I think she was right about the eye's neutrality. It's a part of nature. Maybe it is nature itself. It's our intentions, our potential positivity or negativity that we bring to the eye, to nature, that makes it important. The quantum moon, the moon of the eye where we find Solanum, is a literal representation of this. It simply reflects that which it orbits. Outer Wilds tells me that we have the power to be the change we want to see. Outer Wilds' game design is innovative, its story eloquent, and to my life, relevant. But it's these combined that shape Outer Wilds into more than its constituent parts, and made it an experience of self-discovery. With other media, I've witnessed impactful character arcs that I could project my own experiences onto, but they were revelations made by fictional characters in between the moments I controlled them. With Outer Wilds, I was thrust into a new universe with nothing explained to me and no failsafe structure to fall back on. In Outer Wilds, the protagonist didn't learn how to fly their ship. I did. In Outer Wilds, the protagonist didn't learn the rules of quantum behavior. I did. In Outer Wilds, the protagonist didn't make it to the eye. I did. In Outer Wilds, I was the protagonist. In Outer Wilds, the personal, existential revelations were my own. The end of Outer Wilds is also the end of the universe. But because the universe isn't a lifeless one, because we, the player character, are alive, everyone we've met along the way lives on in us. We gather around the campfire at the eye of the universe. Feldspar breathes in. Gabbro breathes out. Esker whistles. Church shuffles towards their drums. Rybeck strums their banjo. The prisoner reaches for their bow. And Solanum plays her instrument whose intricacies are beyond our comprehension. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that we understand her expression, the collective expression of these souls from across the universe who've imbued it with life, for me to hear, for you to hear, for us to hear. The air is still and we fill it. Audibly, physically, the chorus manifests a visual concentration of our stories and culture that expands into a sphere, and we jump in and give it our life to... give life to a new universe. I still know I won't live forever, but I will give back to this sphere of life. My body can fertilize the ground, my organs can extend the life of someone else, and my consciousness will live on in the people whose lives crossed paths with mine, and they will live on in the same way. And maybe that's enough. So in the face of the overwhelming anxiety I feel when I think about my fleeting existence, Outer Wilds gives me hope. Maybe if I'm lucky, someday I can even make something that touches someone else's life in the way that Mobius Digital have influenced mine. To the people that made Outer Wilds, thank you.